Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And man, playoff hockey, like we said, second round is going to pick things up considerably. So far, so good. We have a double overtime game in the books. We have that crazy game last night between Edmonton and Vancouver, and we have some fireworks in Boston versus Florida, a 1-1 series there. Interesting that the second round, not interesting, expected that the second round becomes that much more entertaining.
It's always how it goes. Second round is more entertaining. The first round is going to be a little boring. It's going to have, obviously, a bunch of those teams that maybe shouldn't be in there, quote unquote. But sometimes you get some good series, but most of the time it's just here's some regular season hockey carried into some more important contests. And so far, so good on the second round. Nothing's disappointed, except for maybe the Carolina Hurricanes a little. But, I mean, Anderson kept them in that game into that second overtime. And we had the Trouba thing happen, hilariously.
Yeah.
And clearly nothing's coming from that, so that's the end of that discussion. Close the book there. But I forget if I said this into the microphone or after we're recording or before we're recording, that Boston series. I kept saying, watching Boston-Toronto, whoever wins is going to get steamrolled. I mean, it looks like their steamroller is kicking up. It's picking up gas. I am also stunned at the Edmonton Oilers. Stunned.
Yeah, I mean, it's only one game, so everything can obviously turn around. We all know that game one does not determine the series half the time, but, that was an interesting way to go about losing game one if you're the Edmonton Oilers. So we'll keep an eye on the playoffs. Obviously, Jake Guentzel having a big game, as you mentioned, alluded to for the Carolina Hurricanes in game two, but it's all for naught because they lose in double overtime. But let's talk a little bit more about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's look back to start things off at the Ron Hextall era, simply because I got this question during Tuesday's live stream. And Horwat, I wanted to get your opinion on it. The question coming in was, quote, if you could undo any Hextall era trade, what would it be? Now, of course, the reason that it makes sense to go back to this is because, man, did Ron Hextall put the Penguins behind the eight ball with a lot of the moves that he made, and they would not be in the position they were in today if not for a lot of missteps by that front office and by that, general manager in particular, and Ron Hextall. But what is the one move that you think really put them back, that if you could get a mulligan on, you would like to make sure that they switch things over and keep that singular player, or just avoid from getting that singular player onto the Penguins organization?
I think for a lot of people, two will come to mind right away.
Mm-hmm.
And that is both trades that happened on July 16th, 2022, and that is trading away John Marino and Michael Matheson in two separate deals. But I'm going to stick with just the John Marino one for now, because at least out of the Matheson deal, they got Jeff Petrie, who eventually turned into Erik Karlsson in a way, and Ryan Poehling, who I at least supported throughout his one season in Pittsburgh. I thought he could have been a solid guy to keep around. He was a younger guy, a speedier defensive mind, but, different reasons. I would say the John Marino one, because obviously everyone knows what he's done in New Jersey since, how good he was in Pittsburgh before leaving. But also on the flip side of the John Marino deal was Ty Smith, who just didn't work out here. And that's all there is to it. If Ty Smith came in and was a good NHL player and was steady in the lineup and produced at when he was in the NHL lineup, he did a fairly good job, but he just wasn't given the opportunities. But if he staked his claim, stuck in the lineup, I would say that maybe that one's kind of a wash almost. But the fact that Ty Smith didn't, and he ended up being part of the Jake Guentzel deal, there goes that. I would have to say it's the John Marino trade.
Yeah, John Marino, you look at what happened after he left. It's been a revolving door for that second position on the right side. I mean, you had Jeff Petrie, you had missing somebody else in my head. Obviously, then it becomes Erik Karlsson, but you just had no stability on that right side. Of course, Karlsson brought it, but it's not on a defensive mind. I mean, you look at what the Penguins have done defensively since John Marino left the organization. They finished 6th in expected goals against per 60 minutes the last time he was in Pittsburgh. And I understand he didn't have a good season either, but it was him and Marcus Pettersson. That was your second pairing, and that was a really good shutdown pairing. There's a reason that they were, a playoff team that year. There's a reason that they were a good defensive team that year, and Marino was a big part of that. Now, he didn't have the greatest season his last year in Pittsburgh, but that is a move that, especially when you look at the return, and that's where I'm going to go with the other one, because whenever this was brought up on Tuesday, that's the first one that I went to, was Marino for Ty Smith and a third-round pick. Just didn't seem like very much of a return at all, especially considering what Ty Smith turned into. The other one I'll bring up is Jared McCann for Philip Hollander and a 7th. Hollander stayed in the organization for maybe a full season, didn't play very much at the NHL level, if at all. I think he had 3 games played or something, that you can count on one hand, and a 7th round pick for a guy that turns into a 40 goal scorer. Now, the reason I picked Marino over the McCann trade, if I had one mulligan, is because one, the Penguins are in much more dire of a need of defensive defensemen than they are of forwards at the moment. You have guys like Michael Bunting that can be, top line forwards. You have Brian Rust, who should have been a 30 goal scorer if he could have stayed healthy this season. But again, that's always been the rub on Rust, is he can't play a full season. You had Jake Gensel up until this season. You have Drew O'Connor emerging. And also, I don't think that Jared McCann would have gotten the opportunity to become the goal scorer that he is with the Seattle Kraken if he would have stayed with Pittsburgh, whereas John Marino was already in that position and would have been continuing to stay in that position, and just make sure that ended up being a really solid point for the Penguins to have that defensive force. Even if Marcus Pettersson moves up, then who do you have on the left side to go with Marino? You don't have to worry about that person being slightly offensively inclined. Look at what Marino and Ryan Graves did. I would assume that if you have Marino, you end up not needing to bring in Ryan Graves. But even if you did, those two worked out really well in New Jersey. And again, at that point, you're really diving into the multiverse of what would happen as a result if they would have kept Marino. But I think Marino's the top one. McCann, to me, is 100% the second one, because he gave him away for nothing. And I think everybody can agree that, the way that Ron Hextall handled the Seattle expansion was just wrong from the very beginning.
Yeah, no one was a fan of that from the jump. And another trade that I'm sure everyone's sort of screaming about is the Jeff Carter trade. I'll say the trade itself isn't bad. It was the contract he signed after. It wasn't the deal itself. I mean, especially at the time, considering what the Penguins got out of Jeff Carter in that first year or so after the deal, until he signed the extension, that is really what sunk everything for him and for him on the team. I mean, there aren't many trades to pick from, because Ron Hextall is a very quiet GM when it came to making moves, very patient. This is the word I was looking for. But I mean, just when you scroll around, the ones that he did make they're brutal. There's some tough ones in here. There are a couple of good ones, but overall, I'd say it wasn't that great. And it's pretty easy to sort of pick and choose which ones are looked at as negative for the team overall, especially now with that, hindsight being 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Marino, McCann, and the Matheson trade, I think, are in a league of their own. And I think there's a little bit of a separation between that next round, but a second-round pick for Mikael Granlund certainly didn't work out in their favor. Now, not that Mikael Granlund is, he went on to have a pretty good season in San Jose, but again, same thing as McCann. Would he have been given the opportunities to have a similar season in Pittsburgh? Probably not, but he just did not fit at all. Like the worst fit I think I've seen on a Penguins team in a long time for a second round pick. And that one's tough. And then the other one that I saw, Sam Lafferty to Chicago for Alex Nylander. Lafferty's gone on to have a pretty solid NHL career as a bottom 6 player, has speed, has some hands, has some physicality, really good on the forecheck. And in exchange, you bring in a guy in Alex Nylander that had a couple of cups of coffee at the National Hockey League level, didn't really show anything, maybe a little bit of an improved sense of, excitement for the second line a couple times last season, but he could never finish. He could never put it all together. And he ends up going out the same way he came in a trade that ends up flying under the radar for scraps.
Yeah. Yeah. And sure, Nylander's gone on to do some pretty good things, but again, it's much like the Jared McCann situation. He's given the opportunity. He's been being given more opportunity to show what he can do in a higher role on a different team. He just wasn't going to have it here. He was also just never given the chance in Pittsburgh fully. I mean, those few games that Nylander did get here, He looked good, but nothing was going in. Nothing was going to the net for him. That was it. It was just not working on the NHL Penguins, because it did work in the AHL, but that doesn't mean too much, So I can see that one being up there too.
Yeah, the best player I would say that was traded away was Jared McCann. The player that was most needed by the Penguins was probably John Marino. And I think that's the best way to look at it for those two. Either way, a lot of the Hextall moves and even some of the Dubas moves and some of the GM Jim Rutherford moves have gotten the Penguins to where they're at, but it's all on Dubas to get him back on the right path. And we'll see what he's able to do this offseason. Or are there going to be more trades that we look at in a year or two and say, wow, if you could get a mulligan on one of these Dubas trades, which one would it be? So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on for sure. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we threw out a weekly Pens poll yesterday about Erik Karlsson now that the NHL Draft Lottery is over and the first-round pick is no longer in possession of the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll talk about that after the break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. We threw out a weekly Pens poll, and I think I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this tomorrow, but some surface level conversation is warranted for this one. Now that the deal is completed, 14th overall pick is officially going over to the San Jose Sharks. Are you happy with the Erik Karlsson trade? Of course, that pick was initially a top 10 protected, which could have turned into a 2025 first rounder if the Penguins would have finished in the top 10. They had a 1.5% chance of winning the lottery, moving up to 4th overall and being given the option to keep that pick. But instead, they stick at 14. They're forced to give up the 2024 first. Are you happy with the trade, Horwat? 73% of voters say yes, they're still happy with the trade. 27% say no.
I am still happy with the trade. Yeah, you were going to have to spend a first round pick to get a player like Karlsson, whether or not he panned out in anyone's eyes this season or in the seasons coming. You have to make those sort of tough decisions to lose first round picks. The Penguins have done it a bazillion times over the last bazillion years. So it's just another run of the mill situation for the Penguins where they traded away their first round pick. Maybe they get a late round one back, and when it comes to the Carolina Hurricanes, but for what it's worth, I'd say you might have a couple of seconds. Maybe you lose one of those seconds in a trade whenever you're trying to work things around. But at the end of the day, I'd say Erik Karlsson, I would say, succeeded enough that it makes the first round pick worth it. It makes the rest of the deal go. And just for me, I'm still perfectly fine with losing this first round pick. For what it's worth, the Penguins probably could have kept it had they not gone on that run too.
Yeah, if they didn't go, 8-1-3 to close out the season, they probably would have finished in the top 10 and had the option. But even as Rob Rossi said, and we had discussed and debated about it before the season ended, if they have that first rounder, it's not a guarantee that they would have kept it. They might have moved it on and said, you know what, we want to make sure that we still have that first rounder coming down the line in 2025. So they might have forfeited it. But again, who knows at this point? I think that I would have leaned towards taking it simply because there's a couple of prospects that really would be nice to add to what you have right now. Obviously, what you look at, in the last calendar year, what has been added to the prospect pool has been nothing short of, phenomenal, considering every prospect that's been added, at least high-end prospect that's been added over the last year, immediately slotted above what was already there. I mean, Braden Yeager, probably the top prospect. Vasily Ponomarev, probably in the top 3 or 4. Same thing goes for Ville Koivunen. And, that's great to add 3 forwards of that ilk. But I also see, the other side of this where, you'd like to have a lottery pick this year because there's a lot of top-end, high-end defensemen there. And the Penguins don't have a lot of depth when it comes to their defensive prospects. So I get both sides of it, but I think there's been a little bit too much extremism on either side of the things. Like there's, this is going to set them back for years because they don't have this first round pick, or there's, this first round pick doesn't matter at all. The truth is in the middle. Yes. Does it sting to not add another player at 14th overall, yeah, you'd like to get that. You'd like to add that. But at the same time, that's the exchange for having a guy with the ceiling that Erik Karlsson brings. Did he reach his ceiling in year number one? No, I think we all agree his ceiling was much higher than 56 total points and much higher than taking the Penguins to another missed postseason. But can he still reach that ceiling next year and potentially the year after that and potentially the year after that? Yeah, I'm going to still hold out hope for that, because when you look at his year in general, his down year was still one of the best play driving years from a defenseman in the entire National Hockey League.
Yeah, it was. We said going in that even a down year offensively from Erik Karlsson is going to be some of the best offense the Penguins have ever seen from a defenseman in a long time. And again, it was maybe still a bit more down than any of us would have liked. Probably still not to our standards of what we wanted, but it was still a successful season. He played all 82 games. He was healthy, which is a rarity for Erik Karlsson, at least in recent memory.
Yeah, back-to-back years, 82 games for him, Crosby, and Malkin. It's kind of interesting that none of them made the playoffs in any of those 2 years.
Oh, well, for Karlsson on
year one in San Jose.
Yeah, for Karlsson in San Jose is one thing, but yeah, but it is what it is, and you're still looking forward to. He found some game during that stretch of 13. I think it was 13-2-1. I think it was that Ned's record going down was 8-1-1 or 8-1-3. Number everywhere, but yeah, he was a big help down that stretch. Now you're expecting to see that going into next season. Kyle Dubas is expecting to see a big rebound from Erik Karlsson in year 2 in Pittsburgh, and who knows, maybe it ends up being worth that first-round pick in the long run because you didn't need it. You got prospects that can come up, and because of Erik Karlsson supplying what he should be supplying for the team. And who knows who you get next year, because had you kept this year's, you lost next season's, and who knows who you're gonna what you're gonna do with that first round pick now. So you have that option to float with.
Yeah, and the other thing I will bring up is we saw a lot of excuses being thrown out there for a guy like Ryan Graves. Oh, it's his first year with a new team. It takes a while to get his feet underneath him. There is some of that needs to be thrown towards Erik Karlsson too. But again, I'm not trying to make excuses for Erik Karlsson. I do think that he underperformed points-wise. What you would have expected, 56 is probably a little bit too low. Even if it would have been towards 65, 67, up towards the 70s, then you'd be like, okay, I mean, that's a drop off from the 100 points, but we all expected a drop off from the 100 points. I mean, that was far and above an outlier for all defensemen, not just for Erik Karlsson in the previous season. But I think you also have to look at the fact that the Penguins were absolutely horrendous at finishing chances. 27th in the National Hockey League in shooting percentage. That's something that has ailed them the last couple of seasons. That's something that if they can figure out, again, I'm not going to say they're going to figure it out because they haven't been able to figure it out the last couple of years. But if they can figure it out, you're going to see Erik Karlsson's numbers shoot right back up to normal because the amount of opportunities that he created, 8th in rebounds created among defensemen, nobody was there to finish it. Nobody was in front of the net to put the puck in the back of the net. Maybe next year, a full season of Michael Bunting, maybe Drew O'Connor adapts to that a little bit. Maybe the Penguins continue to bring in players of that similar characteristic who are able to play in the net front, who are able to put away rebound chances. If they do that, Erik Karlsson bounces back to his normal self. And if that's the case, then you're getting that for a second year instead of a player that 100% would not have played at the National Hockey League level next year. And if you're truly into giving this team another chance at a playoff run, that pick is not going to get you any closer in the next 2 years. Erik Karlsson will. So at the end of the day, that's why I'm still perfectly fine with that first round pick, especially because the rest of that trade was dumping off contracts that were problematic for the Penguins. And that's something we always bring up. We haven't brought it up yet, but that always has to be part of this discussion.
It does. Yeah. It was big cap dump trade for the Penguins as well. I mean, it's hysterical going back. Like I just mentioned Jeff Petrie in that last one, in that last segment with Hextall's trade for Mike Matheson being sent out, turned into Jeff Petrie, which in a way turned into Erik Karlsson. And, that train goes on. So, yeah, it was, you had to spend that first round pick to dump out guys like Jeff Petrie, Jan Ruda, Mikael Granlund, another Hextall addition, all Hextall additions if you're following along. It was a big changing of the guard trade too. Okay, yeah, we're losing a first round pick, but clearly with those names going out, it's obvious there is change coming to the team and it's coming from Kyle Dubas. Those are all things to hang your hat on too. I'm fully with losing the first round pick for this year. You have it now again for next season. Maybe you trade that one away for something big. You never know. It's a good situation to be in, I think. It's no big deal losing the first round picks. Plus, like I said, this team has been successful without them already. I get the organization's a little different. I get the league is a little different. And you're going to need those young prospects. But, where the Penguins sit, 14, probably not going to make the NHL right out of camp. Who knows where they sit next year? You hope for it being 32 even. But a guy like that isn't going to make the NHL a year after their draft. So draft picks are good to have and good to hang on to, but whenever you're trying to, as the Penguins are still trying to do, win now, they become more useful as trade pieces anyway.
You said something interesting there, and you said maybe they trade away that 2025 first rounder. There's very select few players that I would be willing, if I was Kyle Dubas, to trade away that first rounder for during the summer, especially considering what you saw happen this past season, where you traded away and you still end up in the same position drafting wise at 14th overall. I would, unless it's a Mitch Marner, and again, that is a heavy piece of conversation that's probably going to get talked about a lot, unless it's a Mitch Marner or maybe a Linus Ullmark if you can free things up. Again, maybe. I'm not trading away that first round pick until it's in season and you see a little bit about where you're going to be as far as whether or not this is a team that can actually contend or actually make a postseason and make some noise.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Like, it would be into next season. It would be like the trade deadline deal if they're going for it.
Yeah.
I honestly may not even touch it this summer.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks too, because when you like Ullmark is one thing. I don't know what his information or what his background looks like. For Marner, though, I would still not deal out that first round pick. I know you might have to for a guy like Marner, but he's got a year left on his contract. Let's say he doesn't want to return to Pittsburgh because of reasons if this trade happens. Okay, well, not only are you're not losing Marner for nothing. You got that year of work out of him to see what could have happened. But now you're losing Marner and you don't have a first round pick to back it up. That just doesn't seem like a smart business move.
Yeah.
In that sense. But I've already made it pretty obvious. I'm all on the Marner train. You just have the Penguins and Kyle Dubas and me would just have to hope that Toronto understands that they're going to lose the deal. Probably they're going to have to take, especially because he's going into the last year of his deal. They just might not get a first round pick for him. Penguins have a couple seconds to spend, but do they want to wait until the third round of the draft to have action?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think I'd be more willing, especially if the Penguins were able to get that second first round pick this year, or not second, but the other first round pick this year, and be able to trade that 31st or 32nd pick away. But again, I also, at this point, kind of assume that there's going to be an extension baked into whatever Marner deal there is. I know that that's not a given, but again, these are all small things that go into this conversation. I would say unless it's Marner or unless it's an Ullmark, a goaltender like that. But again, I'm not sure that a first is going to be needed for Ullmark because he has a 15-team no-trade list. He's on the last year of his contract as well, and he's shown at the trade deadline that he is not afraid to use that no-trade list as he nixed one at the trade deadline. So again, there might not be a first-round pick that is needed to get one of these players, but there's, like I said, a select few players, 1, 2, maybe 3, that I'd be willing to give up a first-round pick for this summer. If not, obviously I would wait at that point until the trade deadline to see exactly what you have in the team next season, where they stand in the NHL standings. But again, these are all discussions that, once you get to May and there's not a lot of news, this is all hypotheticals that you can bring up and you can toss around and change the perspectives. So we'll continue to do that here. But up next, we want to preview the World Championships. We've talked about it a little bit. I mentioned a little bit about it on Tuesday's live stream. Let's do a full preview here right after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. World Championships of the IIHF begin tomorrow. Penguins now have 7 players representing their countries over there in Czechia. Alex Nedeljkovic, the latest to join. He joins Team USA as their netminder, a duo of Alex Lyon, and I can't remember the second one off the top of my head. I have the lineup here. We'll bring it up here in a second. But Alex Nedeljkovic joins Team USA, and the other Penguins, 6 of them, going over to Czechia. Of course, Team Sweden has Marcus Pettersson, Erik Karlsson. Team Finland has Valtteri Puustinen and Jesse Puljujärvi. Michael Bunting joins Team Canada, and the last one is Ravis Ansons for Team Latvia Penguins prospect. So 7 players going over to Czechia, representing their countries. Which of those players, excluding Alex Nedeljkovic, of course, even though he does have a goalie goal on his resume, which of those Penguins will score the most points in the IIHF World Championship tournament?
Ooh, I like the position Michael Bunting's being put in already. First of all, he's playing on Team Canada, and they seem to always have good tournaments in hockey because, that's what they're supposed to do.
Hockey, yeah.
And if that lineup holds, the one that I've already seen him play on, which is first line with Connor Bedard, I could see that being pretty prosperous for Michael Bunting, especially as a net front guy in a tournament where physicality, well, I don't know what the physicality is like in this tournament specifically, but international tournaments usually aren't physical, at least these days. If he's bringing a little physicality to a tournament, not used to it, clearing space, getting set up in the net front, Michael Bunting could have plenty of points in this tournament, especially considering the other names that are going. You're not expecting Pettersson to do a lot of scoring. Jesse Puljujärvi does a lot of offensive production in international play. It's just been a minute, so we'll see if he's still able to, produce at that level. Valtteri Puustinen's a sleeper just because you never know. And then there's Erik Karlsson, who we'll see.
Yeah, wouldn't it be crazy if Erik Karlsson went up like 3 points per game in World Championships? People would lose their mind in Pittsburgh.
Happy.
But I like that Michael Bunting selection because not only is he playing with Connor Bedard, his centerman is Jared McCann. So, you're getting a lot of talent there. Again, I don't know if that's going to hold because who wasn't on that roster was Macklin Celebrini. He is expected to join that lineup as well.
He just left.
Yeah.
He went the other way. Macklin Celebrini went home, didn't he?
Did he?
Was he going back again?
I don't know. I have no idea. I thought he was supposed to join the regular team for Worlds, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But if he isn't, and that is the lineup they roll with, Bunting playing with Bedard and McCann, yeah, you would expect him to score a lot of points. I'm going to put my money on the sleeper, though. I'm going with Valtteri Puustinen. What was one of the biggest issues? I mean, he had 20 points in 52 games. That's not a bad number for a player that is just getting used to the National Hockey League. But what was one of the biggest issues as to why he wasn't able to finish those opportunities and score more goals? He didn't have the space. This is international competition. There's going to be a lot of space, and there's not a lot of NHL talent on that Finnish team. So I think he's going to get an elevated role there, probably getting some number 1 power play time. And with his shot and his scoring ability, I'm going to say he goes off. I'm going to say he has himself a tournament similar to what we saw Drew O'Connor do last year, where he has a really good World Championships and parlays that into a solid, training camp and into a solid next season, a breakout season. It all started for Drew O'Connor at the World Championships. That's what I'd like to see, and that's what I'm going to predict for one Valtteri Puustinen. So it'll be Bunting for you, Puustinen for me. And that brings us to the final piece of information here that we want to share with you. Prediction time. Who takes gold, Horwat? Who do you think wins the 2024 IIHF World Championship tournament?
I mean, Canada's always just up there in terms of having that possibility. They have 20-something. I forget how many. And won it last year, looking to defend their title. But I could see Sweden being a sleeper choice as well. They, from the lineups that I've seen, or at least the rosters that I've seen, it's a pretty well-rounded roster. I mean, sometimes these tournaments, these teams kind of select who's the best at offense in each position they can find. But they picked up a guy like Marcus Pettersson, who's coming off of a great defensive year. So if there are any teams that are just shooting offense, Marcus Pettersson maybe is able to shut down some of those attacks. Finland's got a good team full of former Penguins, by the way.
Oh yeah, big time.
Hilarious. But I think I'm torn between Canada and Sweden. I think those are the two usual favorites. Team USA, the roster looks good. I just think it's one of those rosters where you're going to need to slay the dragon as per usual whenever you are USA playing hockey. But I'm torn. I would stick between Canada and Sweden, with the edge going to Canada just for the Connor Bedard factor too.
Yeah, I'm looking at Team Sweden's roster here, and it doesn't have their goaltenders, which is interesting. But I mean, you look at their defense, and Jonas Brodin, Rasmus Dahlin, Pettersson, of course, Erik Karlsson, and Victor Hedman. Like, that is a stellar blue line. And then you have guys like Adrian Kempe, Joel Eriksson Ek, Lucas Raymond coming off a really solid season. There was another one that I saw down here, and Andre Burakovsky. Obviously, a lot of talented NHL players on that lineup, but I'm going to go with Team USA. I'm going to go with them simply because I saw the lineup that they have, and I think it's a really good mix of young players. It's a good mix of physical players, guys that can, kind of adapt to however the other team is playing. I'm going to bring it up here because I said this is the roster I saw. This is what sold me. I'm going to put it on YouTube at Inside the Penguins, and it looks, to me, stellar. Johnny Gaudreau, Shane Pinto, and I'm trying to read that one there. Looks like Matt Boldy as the first line, but I really like their middle six. Brady Tkachuk, Trevor Zegras, Cole Caulfield. That line is going to be electric to watch, and I really, really like the young studs on the third line. Will Smith, who is a San Jose Sharks prospect. Ryan Leonard, physical guy, power forward that's in the Washington Capitals system, and Joel Farabee. I just really like what they have to show, and also their defense is really good too. Seth Jones, Zach Werenski, a little bit of, former player, former teammate working in there. You have Jake Sanderson, Jeff Petrie, former Penguin, is on that lineup, and then you have a couple young guys in Alex Vlasic and Luke Hughes, not to mention, he's a battler. You have Alex Nedeljkovic now in net with Alex Lyons. So I really like that Team USA. They're not going to be the favorites. I do think Canada is going to end up being the favorite, and then maybe Sweden, like you mentioned, just because of having multiple Norris Trophy winners that can just produce offense from the back end. But I'm going to roll with Team USA. I think Team USA has a really good shot this year, so that's who I'm going with.
I like that. Were those lines, by the way? Because if Team USA stacked to the point of having a possible, or how about this, having a Calder Trophy nominee as the scratch, nuts. I think that's a pretty good thing to have for Luke Hughes. He's a Calder Trophy finalist, right?
I believe so as well. Yeah, and this was the lineup for their pre-tournament game. So yes.
Okay. Love it. That's a solid lineup too. I just think it's just one of those tournaments where Canada's going to have that edge. They're going to bring a little extra firepower. If you were curious about the goalies on Team Sweden, it is Jesper Wallstedt, Samuel Ersson, and Philip Gustafsson.
Okay, so again, a little bit more of a former Penguin flavor in there with Philip Gustafsson, but I don't hate that goaltending trio. So yeah, it's interesting. It makes it interesting, but I'm gonna still stick with the red, white, and blue as we're closing in here on finally, Memorial Day, and finally the start of this tournament. I'm ready for pool time. My pool is not open until Memorial Day. I just really need to get outside.
Got a couple of weeks still.
And I'm sure everybody else is feeling the same way. But World Championships start tomorrow over in Czechia. Keep an eye out for, a lot of former Penguins and a lot of current Penguins. Should be a fun tournament. More hockey is never a bad thing. So we'll keep our eye on that tournament and see how those players are performing. Because like we said, sometimes it can give us a little bit of an eye as to who is going to play well next season. Maybe not if you're looking at a guy like Karlsson, who's established and we know what he is, but specifically for a guy, like a Valtteri Puustinen and how he performs on Team Finland, like a Jesse Puljujärvi and how he's able to play in this tournament. So keep an eye on some of those guys. It's going to be a fun tournament. And obviously Stanley Cup playoffs continuing to roll on as it gets more and more interesting here in the second round. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.